So I'm here in the Central Valley in Wasco, right near Shafter, and we just made an announcement of our progress here on the high-speed rail system. We're now in the process of starting to lay track, 119-mile first phase, fully funded because of the investments we'll make through the Cap and Invest program through 2045. We're going to start seeing precisely what you see here, real tracks, real progress.
12 seconds later.
Workers seen stepping back, all unharmed, as firefighters attacked from above. The nearby freight railway closed.
We have the railroad tracks here that we ended up having to close down and stop the trains because we have a ladder truck in place that's blocking the tracks.
So we unfortunately have some updates on Gavin Newsom and the literal clown car that is the California high-speed rail. Some of my longtime viewers will know it's one of my favorite topics to speak about. But apparently this week, they've proven Vince wrong, at least they think, by announcing that they have now started to lay the first tracks of the train, and Gavin Newsom celebrated this as a huge accomplishment. Look, guys, progress is being made. We're finally laying down the first railroad tracks too, which I have to say, if you're a person with common sense, you're probably begging the question in response, understanding the timeline here. How exactly is it possible that after 18 years nearly, and nearly $18 billion spent, you're only now just beginning to lay down the railroad tracks? That doesn't even make sense. What were you doing all this time? How does it take almost 2 decades to put down a single one? To which I, of course, respond by saying, don't be racist, okay? Don't be a right-wing Nazi conspiracy theorist bigot by remotely questioning maybe our DEI contractors may have embezzled the money and it's one of the biggest money laundering crimes in the modern history of U.S. politics. No. Trust me, everything is perfectly fine, and you must support the evil fascist Trump administration if you believe that a high-speed train from Merced to Bakersfield taking some 30 years to build doesn't serve any actual practical function. Don't engage in right-wing lies. Don't be complicit with this administration, is apparently the excuse. So, anyways, long story short, Gavin Newsom does this huge, gigantic photo op. Oh, look, we're finally building the train. Here's the story today, though. Apparently, just hours after Gavin Newsom's big event celebrating the progress he's made, I kid you not, apparently the California high-speed rail caught on fire. That is right. He leaves immediately saying, look, we're building all of it. It gets lit up in flames. Now, first of all, if you want any summary of the literal dumpster fire, that's not a metaphor, it's a literal thing, right? The literal dumpster fire that has been this high-speed rail project. And by the way, I don't claim to speak for the man upstairs, but if they were ever looking for a sign as to whether they should continue this after losing federal funding and all of it, I mean, I don't know how much clearer that can get, that this is just not a good idea. But nonetheless, let's bring you this full update here today, guys, right? Again, the train actually caught fire, or what's being built of the train, I should say, actually caught fire within hours of Gavin Newsom celebrating having laid the first rails. All right, let's get into it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, I don't want to get too much into the whole monologue again of explaining the history of this high-speed rail because we've done it many times before, but I suppose perhaps a brief crash course might be necessary for those not familiar.
If the governor and his team would like to take me for a trip on the high-speed train from San Francisco to Los Angeles that was supposed to be built 5 years ago, I will happily retract my criticism because the governor knows that I'm not lying. The governor knows this project is an embarrassing disaster.
Well, they paid $12 billion before they even laid 1 foot of track, and the 1 foot they did lay was a bridge to nowhere.
Yeah, it's worse than that now. We're up to, I think, 17, 18 billion. This project started in 2008, and they have built absolutely nothing. They haven't laid any track at all.
No, they built the bridge. They built that bridge with no track to it.
Right, you have one bridge to nowhere, and they celebrate this as some big accomplishment. Look at this, we built something. Even just yesterday or a couple of days ago, Newsom comes out and says, oh, we are entering the track laying phase. What does that mean? We've apparently
$20
been
billion
entering the
later?
track-laying phase for a decade now. And so the New York Times came out and they did an expose saying this project is not going to be done by the end of this century. At the end of this century, and the cost has ballooned to some $128 billion when it was supposed to be finished 5 years ago.
Where did it go?
Yeah, so just to briefly recap the full chronology of the high-speed train that we've told many times before. Back in 2008, that's right, that's the same election where Barack Obama won his first term. It was that long ago. I was in kindergarten, by the way. The California electorate passed a ballot proposition that would fund a high-speed train from Los Angeles to San Francisco. The estimated budget at the time was going to cost about somewhere around $20 to $30 billion. I think the initial amendment set aside $10 billion in funding. And as Kevin Kiley points out there, it was supposed to be done by the year 2020, which now is over 6 years ago, right? We're closer to the next decade than we are even the decade it was supposed to be finished in. And in that time frame, as they point out, they never ended up laying a single track. The budget estimate for the train somehow exploded $100 billion. Now they're saying it's going to cost about $130 billion. It's been such a disaster, such a joke, that now they even had to modify the train to instead of going from LA to San Francisco, which is something that would make logical, practical sense, because that would be too far, they're now basically taking the train only from Merced to Bakersfield, California. Which those of you who are not from the state and don't basically know those areas, you're talking about two relatively small agricultural towns, essentially in the middle of the Central Valley, that there's a reason why we've basically said it's a train to nowhere, because you're going from nowhere to nowhere, right? No offense to those places, but anyone from Merced or Bakersfield will tell you there's nothing to do here, and no one for any function ever is going to be taking a train from Bakersfield to Merced. It might make sense, for example, to build a cargo train that's going to ship something like agricultural equipment because it's just a bunch of farmland. But no one in Bakersfield has ever said, honey, I can't wait for our vacation in Merced this year, and certainly not something that would justify a price tag currently of about $30 to $40 billion. So that is essentially what has happened. And if you're wondering why this project has taken so long, I don't think it's exactly a big mystery. Under the guise of liberal regulations and woke politics, essentially a gigantic corruption and money laundering operation has gone on, where they say, oh, we can't build the train yet because we have to do this environmental study on it first. And then, let's do the contracting to clear the pavement and all this. And the contractors overbuild the state of California, get absolutely nothing done. And that's how every single time all of their government projects end up past date, right? They're late, they're over budget, and nothing gets done, and you have to modify it because that much money, yes, gets stolen. And when we point out so often, once again, that woke politics is a very convenient excuse for mass money laundering, fraud, embezzlement, and crime, that's exactly what we're referring to, right? Because you take the liberal approach to government contracting, magically a bunch of people seem to run off with a bunch of money. That's how this type of stuff goes. So what's happened more recently in the past year is that Sean Duffy and the Trump administration, using the Department of Transportation, have cut all federal funding for the high-speed rail for obvious reasons. This thing is stupid. It's a train to nowhere. There's absolutely no point. And that sort of political nature of it has suddenly caused Gavin Newsom to take serious interest in basically saying, no, we're actually finally going to get this done. And, he's ridiculed people for saying, oh, you say it's a train to nowhere, but, me personally, I think Bakersfield and Merced are very important. We have past videos on all of this, by the way. To which I say, okay, I understand the populist rhetoric. I'm not trying to insult Bakersfield or Merced, but no, economically speaking, that doesn't make sense. You can't, you can build a high-speed train with no actual function to it, just as a point to prove Trump wrong, but that's exactly right what Gavin Newsom is doing. So that, of course, leads us all to this week, where apparently they have finally entered the track laying phase, some nearly like $10 to $20 billion later. And of course, we have Gavin Newsom not just celebrating it, but bragging, right? Saying, quote, this is the only high-speed rail system of its type anywhere in the United States of America. To which James Woods here properly responds, yeah, the type that has no rails. Exactly.
You want to be big, you got to be big in big things. This is the only high-speed rail system of its type anywhere in the United States of America. You could talk all you want You guys are actually delivering, making things happen.
I mean, I guess in a sense, Gavin Newsom is correct. It is the only high-speed rail of its type in America. It's the only high-speed rail that claims to exist but doesn't. I've never seen an invisible train in my life. Not even China has those. So I guess American technology must just be super ahead, right? That's why we have invisible high-speed trains that don't exist and there's just ghosts on them. But wow, you know? Yeah, does Japan have that? Does China have that? No, not just only in America, only in California is such a thing possible. And he sits there and says, you guys are delivering on it as it pertains to the construction workers and the contractors behind him. Delivering on what exactly? We're still searching for the answer to this question, but yeah, overall extremely ridiculous. And as I so often say about Newsom, I think he's just trying to rely on the nation's broader ignorance as to what's going on in California, and that's basically how he's going to campaign in 2028, assuming he's just going to say, right, well, we're building a high-speed rail, and people say, oh, that sounds cool, yeah, infrastructure's cool, they're getting that done, that's impressive. But the full timeline here is actually relevant, you know?
Chugga chugga choo choo.
So I'm here in the Central Valley in Wasco, right near Shafter, and we just made an announcement of our progress here on the high-speed rail system. We're now in the process of starting to lay track. All of the hard work behind us, now we're going to see the fruits of that. We're going to start seeing precisely what you see here. Real tracks, real progress.
California spent $15 billion to build a train, and Gavin Newsom's bragging about laying down the first track. 16 years later. It's not going to be finished for 20 more years. Gavin will be 80 once it's done. And it's going to cost over $135 billion. It's on pace to go down as the biggest boondoggle in American history. And Gavin's sitting there with a smile on his face like he just finished the Hoover Dam. Even the Daily Show's laughing. Can you imagine this guy gets his hands on the federal budget? This guy spends like a Kardashian, and he crosses his legs like one.
Yeah, well, that basically sums it up. The whole thing is ridiculous. It's like running a race and coming in last place and then bragging as if you won. Actually, scratch that. I don't even think that analogy is appropriate to what Gavin Newsom is celebrating right here. Imagine if you were in a race. You got disqualified on the first lap because you ran into other people's lanes, you started tackling the other runners, and I don't know, let's just say also murdered a puppy along the way, and then you came up to the podium and celebrated as if you won, as even though you didn't even place, you didn't even make it to the finish line. The police are actually outside to arrest you right now for committing several different felonies in the span of your race, but hey, you know, act like a champion, I ran the race. That's basically analogous to Gavin Newsom celebrating his victory here in the high-speed rail. Although, you know, he's a funny guy. He has a great sense of humor, but I guess not the same sense of humor as fate, I guess we'll say here. Because as we hinted at, just hours after Gavin Newsom celebrates this major quote-unquote milestone for his terribly ran high-speed rail project, take a look at what so poetically happens next.
The Church Avenue overpass in southeast Fresno.
There's a lot of plywood and lumber that's involved in this.
Workers seen stepping back, all unharmed, as firefighters attacked from above. The nearby freight railway closed.
We have the railroad tracks here that we ended up having to close down and stop the trains because we have a ladder truck in place that's blocking the tracks.
Fresno Fire's Josh Sellers confirms the fire began just before 9 a.m. Investigators say likely sparked by routine construction. Aerial video from the High-Speed Rail Authority last year appearing to show the impacted structure.
This is the shoring framework that the concrete is then poured in place, and that becomes the permanent structure.
The fire, the latest twist in a controversial project. California High-Speed Rail is more than 6 years delayed and nearly $100 billion over budget. And tonight, the High-Speed Rail Authority issuing a statement confirming everyone was evacuated safely, adding thanks to the work of the Fresno Fire Department, the fire has been extinguished. We will continue to support and coordinate as needed.
So look, I'm obviously glad that nobody was injured, but what a fantastically fitting symbol for this entire California high-speed rail project. You can't even manage construction without things apparently just catching on fire, right? That's the train for you. That's this whole project for you. And it's frankly interesting because Newsom now is trying to suddenly sell the image. Look, we admit we had some problems, but finally the operation is competent. Finally, we have our act together. I'm going to do this whole gigantic press conference, reasserting my faith in this project actually happening. And then moments later, what happens? It catches on fire. Yeah. By the way, look, I'm not here to make any allegations, but I would frankly just like to be sure that this was not arson, right? There's no insurance fraud going on here because, after all, I'm not making any allegations. I'm just saying, hypothetically, considering the massive shady business that we've already seen, it just would not surprise me. Not accusing, I'm just saying it would not surprise me if the contractors here basically set it on fire so that way they can then bill the state of California for also rebuilding whatever got, burnt down here. And then, hey, that's more money for them, right? Could also just be sheer incompetence or, again, just a sign, right? One of those things from the sky that is trying to tell you something, but Gavin Newsom clearly is not listening. I don't know. But there you have it, guys. So, we'll see. I don't know. In about, I'll probably be a grandfather, right? Finally, I'll get up here with my grandkids and finally, talk about the high-speed rail when it's completed. And they're just going to have no idea. They're going to be like, wow, isn't American rail infrastructure so great in 2065? And I'll be like, these kids these days, they don't know nothing, right? What a joke. What a joke. Anyways, that said, though, guys, let me know your thoughts on this entire situation in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.